Hi, welcome back class, and we'll be continuing our topic on urban growth and management. And today we'll be talking about the definition, some characteristics of urban sprawl. So let's revisit what is urban sprawl. Now, urbanization is happening all over the world, and urban growth management strategies have been developed. Some special policies have been developed to manage that growth, that physical growth. Now, sometimes that physical growth have some negative implications on the environment, on the society, on the land. In that term, that sort of physical growth of urban areas is often termed as urban sprawl. However, there is no standard definition for urban sprawl. Now, recently, this type of development has received a lot of attention by various urban planners, scientists, some policymakers or decision makers for catering the SDG 11, that is the sustainable cities and communities. Now, this sprawl, we don't have a standard definition, but this is termed as this terminology used is usually urban sprawl, suburban sprawl, or rural sprawl. Although these terms like urban, rural, or suburban, or peri-urban sometimes might sound contradictory, but they focus on the same problem or a phenomena, that is poorly planned shift of development from urban areas to peri-urban and or rural areas. So generally, it is characterized as some kind of low density haphazard development spiraling out of city centers toward the outskirts. And this rapid expansion uh, of the cities or towns are often characterized as low density housing or reliance to more towards automobile for transportation. Now, what is happening that this urban sprawl is often now have negative impacts, like it is correlated with increased energy use, pollution, traffic congestion, and decline in community cohesiveness. Now, this increase in physical and increase of physical footprint have negative impacts on the environment and the natural areas. We'll talk about more about these impacts later. However, due to the ambiguity of this phenomena, or you can say multidimensional aspect of this phenomena, where it is sometimes impossible to determine what are the causes or the consequences of urban sprawl, and that will have an impact on the policy, why and how those policies are designed to tackle which sort of problems. So, to understand the causes, the consequences, and the policy implications related to sprawl, it is important to find an insight about urban sprawl and then construct sustainable cities and communities over the long term. So let's talk about our first aspect of urban sprawl: unnecessary land consumption. So for many years, urban sprawl have been generally thought to be an exclusively an American problem, that USA cities are facing high levels of urban sprawl. So according to data, but nowadays even in European, some countries are also facing an increased sprawling. What we usually measure urban sprawling, or there's an index to measure urban sprawl, is the percentage of growth of an area divided by the population growth in the percentage. So by dividing this, we can find out what sort of development is happening. For example, let's go back to this slide. We're talking about level of sprawliness, like how much population has growth in the recent years from one era to another era, and how much built up areas has increased. Just by analyzing or looking into it, we can determine whether sprawl is happening or not. Now, this is basically relative sprawling. In other countries, when we talk about like Europe, some countries uh, have experienced population growth rate of by 6%, but at the same time, the built-up area has increased by 20%. So this 6% 20%, that there's a huge gap. So that can be termed as sprawling. A huge level of difference between these percentage of population growth and percentage of built-up growth of a particle within a particle boundary of a city. We can ascertain or we can find out level of how much sprawl is happening in a particular city. So that is one of the most foremost indicator to ascertain whether urban sprawl is happening in a city or not. Now, the second most important, or you can say important characteristic of urban sprawl is basically the densities. It is also termed as compactness of an area or consolidation or fragmentation of urban built-up area. And it is a unit of or an element of urban form which shows you the physical imprint of the city. It is one of the main dimension of urban sprawl where population densities are distributed across the urban space. So it is generally in the city center there are larger densities, and as we go in the outskirts or in the periphery, the densities goes down considerably. So urban spread is said to be inefficient because it generates low density development, especially in the peripheral areas. These can be uh, linear or concentrated, but in the outskirts. It is most frequently cited feature of urban sprawl, where plots, large size residential housing development, or that largely consume amounts of various previously vacant or productive land that was converted into residential schemes. Uh, like generally, European cities are thought to be more dense and are more compact than the North American or American cities. Now, why is it so? Why in the outskirts the densities are low? So there is some hypothesis which says that um, when expectation of future development, potential areas which are already developed, they will have limited spaces. As a result, the land values will be higher, and sometimes those areas or already developed areas will will not have enough space, and those areas are generally already densified in the previous eras. But for the expansion of the new city or rapidly growing city, sometimes it is very efficient to just skip over the central area, because it will be very costly to develop that area or renew that area. Urban redevelopment or urban renewal will take a lot of cost. It is generally more efficient that we just build low density develops in the suburban areas. So uh, for that purpose, the we can utilize uh, different techniques to limit the growth. If we limit the growth, we can control the densities. Now, zoning laws are thought to be very efficient because they encourage high density development and can be very helpful in preventing sprawl through promoting these higher densities. Then comes your commercial development along the roads. Now, generally, it is assumed that it is not profitable to set up commercial areas in the outskirts where a lot of low density development is taking place. But what actually happened is that sometimes leapfrog development is happening, in which fragmented development is happening all over the area. So now that leaves some open spaces between different developments that encourages developers to undertake some kind of commercial activities. So the person who was traveling from one place to another, one from housing to the city center for job purposes, and on the way back, he needs to buy something. He or she needs to buy something. So basically, that encourages commercial activity which will cater the needs of those people. So ultimately, this commercial activity is basically supporting the outskirts, the needs of the communities living in low dense areas. And particularly, those commercial activities will start along some different roads. So, some kind of strip or ribbon development also takes place in form of a linear pattern across major arterial highways, and like other aspects of the urban sprawl, it encourages traffic congestion, a lot of uh, congestion, or like is choking points are basically being developed in the entry or exit points of the city, and these commercial development uh, are often also done along with major highways. It also develops on junctions or near interchanges of the city. So that is one of the most one of another, you can say, an aspect of commercial activities along the main roads. Inequalities. Now, sprawl, because sometimes it is easier for the rich people or the richer part of the society which can afford good land in the outskirts, and they can travel inside the cities by their car. So that encourages them to live in the outskirts in low dense areas where they can have more privacy, more environmental friendly environment, you can say, less pollution, and that sort of area that encourages them to live in the suburbs. And similarly, the relatively poor people who cannot afford to travel from far flung areas or from the outskirts, they tend to start living near the city centers or near their jobs. And then therein also develop the densities, and that sometimes due to high cost of infrastructure development, the development in the city centers or those areas is very expensive. So the government sometimes they start encourages the private sector to develop housing schemes in the outskirts or facilitate them or provide them regulations to start activities in the outskirts. So that sometimes also encourages sprawl. So here are some slides showing some inequalities uh, in the cities. Now we've talked about a little bit about it, about the fragmentation process of leapfrog development, in which your development is contiguous, it is scattered along the even there, if there is low density development in some areas, they are very much compact or near each other. But leapfrog development is low density, and those low density housing, they are not connected to each other, they are very much far away from each other. So what happens, it becomes very costly to provide infrastructure facilities or basic amenities to the people who are living in far-flung areas or areas away from the city center. It becomes very difficult for the authorities to provide them with basic needs. So huge infrastructure costs are incurred to give them water supply or sanitation services by the government or the local authority. This is an example from Pakistan. So uh, in the north of a bit north of Islamabad city, there was a place in 2003, in 2002. This is an image from 2002, in which there is a mountainous or hilly area and a lot of uh, green area, so for preservation, a natural environment. And this is the same age in 2013 in 2020, in which low density development is started happening. So that is sometimes some new development or low density development in the outskirts, which is also endangering, or you can say, which is destroying the habitat or wildlife, as well as consuming a very fertile land. And sometimes, here in the picture, you can see that the hilly terrain is now reduced to accommodate such a type of development. So another aspect of characteristic of sprawl is basically a high dependency on automobile. So the use of private automobile in a country or in a city, that also encourages sprawl, where people can easily travel from one place to another. And sometimes uh, lack of public transport or inadequate public transportation systems, sometimes also encourage uh, people to opt for private car use, and that ultimately leads to more urban sprawl. So, for example, some commercial activities in the world, they encourage parking, and there is also a debate or hypothesis basically which says that if you're going to be providing parking, you are basically incentivizing people to use their car. And some other people say that if we don't provide parking, people will start opting for public transport, or they would travel less to a particular place. So it all depends upon whether you want to, how do you want to see the city. So this is a picture from a shopping mall in America, in which a lot of parking is provided. So you are basically encouraging such kind of development. This is another stadium of USA. So it houses it has a capacity of around 70,000 people. And look at the parking space over here. Similarly, in another part in Camp Nou, another stadium, here it accommodates around 100,000 people. But look at this parking space. Parking space is limited, and people tend to travel to this stadium via public transport. There's a transit station near it. So again, this sort of development is encouraging sprawl. So some other characteristics are the lack of sometimes public spaces and community centers, very common in the developing countries. Uh, then a lot of utility expansion is needed, or extensions are regularly needed, which can indicate that sprawl is happening in a city. Uh, if there is no centralized or coordinated planning at your local level or even at the regional level, it will encourage urban sprawl. And sometimes new development is happening outside the established areas, outside the city limits. So your city limits or your urban growth boundaries also play a very vital role in that. Now, coming to the next aspect of sprawl are the causes behind it. Why it is happening? The main reason is rapid population growth. That growth has instigated the need for more housing and more development. And developers, they opt for the most efficient option, and that is developing in the outskirts. That now would need investments. And if the public investment or the private investments along such development in the periphery areas, that would encourage sprawl, and that would also have a effect on the existing centers where the investment will be done more in the outskirts rather than redeveloping an old established built up area. Sometimes your regulations or rules even support such kind of development. Your taxes, your incentivize how much you're taxing someone to provide services sometimes can result in urban sprawl. Low cost of fuel, especially in these American cities, low cost of fuel would most of the time encourage urban sprawl. And one of the most important part are the lower land prices in periphery areas. So if a person is able to buy their own house, their own land in the outskirts, and it is economical for him or her, or they can afford to buy it, they would rather have their own home than live in a rented areas near the city center or in the city center. So sometimes that also incentivizes people to go for low density in development or housing in the periphery areas. And sometimes, of course, the redeveloping your existing center is very difficult. It needs huge investment costs. So people then they are people desires or they need to live near the nature or they want to enjoy rural lifestyle, so they tend to live in the outskirts. And businesses or industries especially, they they need a lot of land, and they would be happy to develop an area in the outskirts, and ultimately that industry would then attract a lot of industrial workers who will tend to live near the industries, and that would cause urban sprawl. Again, sometimes the location between certain buildings, certain fragmented societies, and your city center would uh, help developers in investing in commercial development between such areas. So, in urban centers and housing scheme in the outskirts, they would start developing commercial activities within in the between those areas. Like that would again favor suburban development or urban sprawl, if you call it. And then is even if we are opting for a high density or less sprawling in an area or a metropolitan or a city region, lack of policies, master plan regulations or zoning, or failure of even if such policies are existing, failure to implement those policies would result in urban sprawl. So what are some consequences? So consequences of urban sprawl, of course, we are talking about some characteristics and we have talked about some causes as well. So consequences are pretty much straightforward. So huge infrastructure cost to supply, for let's talk about water supply to the outskirts of sprawled areas, the low density areas. So laying down pipelines from the city center or from the main pipelines of the city to the outskirts would incur a lot of infrastructure or development costs. So that would the government or the local authority, they are bound to provide such services. And it is also established empirically that energy inefficiencies are largely uh, these inefficiencies are basically most of the time or like low density areas have low energy efficiencies. So there is a inverse relation between density and efficient energy use. And we talked about inequality and disparity as well already, and impacts on the wildlife and the ecosystem. So we are destroying the nature, we are destroying and we are creating artificial concrete green infrastructure on land, and that would ultimately uh, dist- uh, help environmental degradation. And so the built up, for example, when there is a built up area, a, a lot of uh, wildlife habitat will be disturbed. Of course, a lot of fertile agricultural land in the outskirts would be damaged or will be at loss or due to this rapid urban sprawling. Now, another aspect of urban sprawling is because of the concrete structure everywhere, urban areas or built up areas, they retain a lot of heat. And that heat is basically turning into the urban heat island effect, which will create climate hotspots in some areas of the city. So overall, an increase of temperature will start happening due to a lot of built up area development in the outskirts, and of course reduction of green spaces of fertile land. So that would multiply the effect of urban heat island. And of course, because people will use their transport to travel from point to another, from low density to their workplaces, a lot of energy will be spent, a lot of carbon emission will start happening, and a lot of carbon emission will be added to the air. So climate change impact or air pollution will be enhanced due to urban sprawling. And sometimes when it's raining, uh, sorry, yeah. So a lot of time when this it rains, for example, in a built-up area, in this gray area infrastructure, a lot of water will start. It will not it sediment into the soil. What will happen is that rainwater would in case of let's take for an instance, a rainfall is happening in a built-up area. This rainwater will then pick up a lot of construction materials or built up, like maybe some chemicals, some gasolines or heavy metals or paint, some waste, some oil, and that or other pollutants in an urban environment. The rain will take that into your lakes or streams or rivers. So any dust or uh, you can say pollution on the ground, on the driveways or roads or in the parking lots, water will wash away those and add it to the nearby water sources. And ultimately, those water streams, rivers, or lakes, they will start their polluting, and ultimately they will disturb the water quality of the those water bodies. Now, ultimately, what about the quantity that when we're constructing built up area, we are utilizing a lot of water. We are over consuming those area or the water for various watering activities or landscape activities, and that will put a strain on the current supply systems and might deplete your water storages. And because that a lot of built up areas or gray area is concrete, basically area is there, the water will not go down into the soil or will not be able to recharge your water table. So what will happen? That ultimately those can cause a water scarcity in those areas. Impacts on now health. Now, of course, when it is urban sprawl is happening and a lot of impact is happening on the water or the environment, pollution is happening. So ultimately, that would create a lot of public health risks in an area. So it can cause respiratory problems. It can cause your discomfort. And similarly, for example, an increase in temperature due to urban sprawling, that can again cause a lot of associated health risks like heat strokes, exhaustion, or maybe even heat related mortalities. So that sort of thing sprawl is encouraging. So that would be enough for today, and we'll talk about how to contain urban sprawl through some different management in the next lecture. Thank you.